So we have been reading this book, A Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma, right? The Chitta section, and we have covered part of it. And you are supposed to go through the book by yourself so that we can proceed faster, right? And I hope that you have been going through the text and making your own notes with regard to the topic of our discussion. Yes, from our study so far, what do you remember? Anyone would like to share your thoughts? Hmm? Maybe I should share a computer screen of the book. So basically our focus is to discuss this 89 or 121 types of chitta, right? And gradually we have been going through this. You should remember that the criteria that is followed to divide the consciousness chitta into different categories are basically two. One is in terms of bhumi, also called avachara, right? And the other is in terms of moral action, you can say, in terms of kusala, akusala, vipaka, and kiriya. Right? Yes. So I think we have gone through this first section of unwholesome chittas, right? Why do you think they are called unwholesome chittas? And what are the unwholesome roots? How many chittas attached to lobha mula? And how many attached to dosa mula? And moha mula? 2. And what are the characteristics of this lobha and dosa and also moha? Within a single moment of cognition, both lobha and dosa cannot coexist, right? What about moha? Moha could be present in every type of akusala chitta, right? Moha could be present in the lobha chittas as well as in the dosa mula chittas. So there are some chittas that are called asankarika. Some chittas are called sasankarika. What do you think is the difference between these two expressions? What does it mean? What does it mean by with the help of others? It could be external prompting. It could also be internal in the sense that when you come up with an idea of performing an action with your own decision or plan, right? And what does it mean by unprompted? It is in a way spontaneous. Do you remember of any example related to this? Unprompted action rooted in greed. You remember we have read some examples from the book. Yeah. So when a kid, steals something, some candy probably, from a shop, without thinking too much that he's, going to steal, or without making any plan and so on, right? Just great arose in him, and then he goes to take out some candies or something from the shop. Yeah. So, and then there is another part that we need to keep in mind, that is some of the chittas, especially in the category of lobha mula, are regarded as somanassa, right? Somanassa sahagata, accompanied by how do you say, pleasant mind, right? And there are some, especially in the category of dosa mula, that are regarded as domanassa sahagata, accompanied by unpleasant mind. And there are some that are accompanied by upekka. What do you think is the difference between somanassa, domanassa, and upekka?
Will be something with opposite, or rather
So manassa means with pleasant mind, right? So when you are carrying out an action, or when a thought moment arises in your mind, if there is a feeling of pleasantness in that moment of mind, that is considered as a somanassa sahagata chitta. Normally it is associated with greed, right? But it is not present in the chittas of hatred, because somanassa and domanassa are opposite to each other. contradictory to each other, right? So pleasantness and unpleasantness cannot be present in the same chitta. That is the idea. Because domanassa refers to unpleasant mind. Now this is, you can regard them as feeling or vedana. So there are two things that are normally, present in different way. One is a feeling of somanassa or domanassa or even upekka. So upekka refers to the state or a condition where both somanassa and domanassa are not present. It is neither associated with pleasant feeling or pleasantness or unpleasantness. And it is not because one goes beyond the duality of pleasantness and unpleasantness, but because one's mind is covered or deluded, right, with ignorance. So one is not in a position to decide whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. So all this three comes under feeling category, Vedana. And then there is another aspect of this cognitive moments, that is ditthigata sampayutta and ditthigata vipayutta. So ditti here generally refers to wrong view, right? So some are with wrong view, some are without wrong view. It does not mean that they are with right view. Ditthigata sampayutta and ditthigata vipayutta. In the Lobha Mula Chitta and also in the Dosa Mula and Moha Mula.
Like Wholesome and Wholesome
Yeah, that is true, but that is because in the same chitta, for example, in the case of Lobhamula chittas, ditti and also greed could be present at the same time, whereas in the case of Dosamula chitta, there could be, how do you say, in a series of cognitive moments associated with dosa, in one single moment, both wrong view or even right view and dosa cannot be present. But, in a series, it could be present. Do you have the entire Pali text of this Abhidhamma Sangaha? Just the Pali text? So this is the Pali text. Now, it is good if you have this Pali text and okay, and also the charts, the important charts You can have them. Of course, they are present in the book. You can, they are present in the book, but you can put them separately, or you can even, for the sake of reference and also for the sake of clear understanding when we are going through the book, you can have them printed, so that every now and then you can look at them. Yeah, do you still have that? Very good. Earlier, I just asked you to have this, I think only the chittas, right? 89 types of chittas in Pali and English. So you are supposed to have this list only, but I'm now here, I'm talking about the book. So this, for example, in the Chitta Paricheda, you have all the listing of chittas, right? That is the first chapter of the text. And then in the second chapter, you have Chetasika Paricheda. So after completing our discussion with regard to different types of chittas, we will come to study the Chetasika. These two are important, and then there are a few more chapters that are important. One is related to the cognitive process. And if we have sufficient time, we will try to go through this chapter on Rupa, because Rupa is also one of the Paramattha Dhamma, right? And the other important chapter would be a discussion on conditionality. That is also important. So if we can cover this few, important topics, that would be, I think, sufficient. Okay, one is the section on Chitta, the other is the section on Chetasika, the other is the cognitive process, and the other is Rupa section, and also the section on Pachayas, different types of Pachayas, conditional relations. Very good. So these are the 8 types of chittas that we have covered. Basically, if you remember this, this section, this represents ahetuka, akusala chitta. See here. So these are the things that we have been reading last week. Tatta kathamang kama vacharam. So this belong to kama vachara, akusala. So kama vachara, akusala chitta. Now kama vachara represent one of the criteria of dividing these chittas. The others are rupa vachara, and lokuttara. And this section represents just the akusala chitta, and then you have ahetuka chitta and sobhana chitta and so on. So 12 types of akusala chittas. The first 8 are 8 belong to lobha category. So manasa sahagatang dittigata sampayuttang asankarikam ekam. This is 1. Sasankarikam ekam. This is 2. So manasa sahagatang dittigata sampayuttam asamkarikam ekam. This is 1 here. And sasankarikam ekam. So 4 altogether, and then the remaining 4 are associated with upekka. Upekka sagatam dittigata sampayuttam asankarikam ekam, sasankarikam ekam. Upekka sagatam dittigata vipayuttam asankarikam ekam, sasankarikam ekam. Imani attapi lobha sahagata chittani nama. And then you have this domanasa sahagata patiga sampayuttam asankarikam ekam, sasankarikam ekam. Imani dvepi patigha sampayutta chittani nama. And we came to know that there is a slight difference between hatred, dosa and patigha, right? So the term patigha is used to refer to all kinds of, hateful situations. The last two come under moha, upekka sahagatam, vichikiccha sahagatam, vichikiccha sampayuttam ekam, upekka sahagatam, uddhacha sampayuttam ekanti imani dvepi mumuha chittani nama. So of the two chittas associated with moha, one is accompanied by vichikiccha, that is doubt, and the other is associated with uddhacha, restlessness. So these are two characteristics, doubt and restlessness. Iti evam sabbatapi dwadasa kusala chittani samattani. Attada loba mulani, dosa mulani cha dvida, moha mulani cha dveti, dwadasa kusala same. Right? So now, today we are going to start our discussion with ahetuka chitta. So look at this expression, ahetuka. These are called rootless consciousness. So you can understand them better in relation to the previous section, where you have chittas rooted in great hatred and delusion. In the case of the next section, next category of chittas, they are without roots. Right? So this is the section. Yeah. Okay, let us start our reading of this section now. Let's read this together, akusala vipaka chittani. So this is one category under ahetuka chittani. There are basically three categories. One is akusala vipaka chitta. The other is kusala vipaka ahetuka chitta, and the other is kiriya chitta, ahetuka kiriya chitta. So there are three sections. Let us first look at this first section. Akusala vipaka chittani, there are 7. Let us read this together. Upekka sahagatang chakku vijnanam tatha sota vijnanam ghana vijnanam jibha vijnanam dukkha sahagatam kaya vijnanam upekka sahagatam sampatichanna chittam upekka sahagatam santirana chittam chati imani sattapi akusala vipaka chittani nama. So in this category, you have these 7 chittas, right? And you can see that the first one, for example, it is referred to this eye consciousness, chakku vijnana, right? So you are familiar with this expression, but this is associated with upekka, accompanied by upekka, right? Tatha, that means in the same way, sota vijnana, that is ear consciousness, and then ghana vijnana, nose consciousness, jivha vijnanam, tongue consciousness, and then you have kaya vijnanam, but this is accompanied by dukkha sahagata. And then again, upekka sahagatam sampatichana chittam and upekka sahagatam santirana chittam. So what you can see here is that there are 5 consciousness that are associated with 5 sense organs, right? Chakku, sota, ghana, jibba, and kaya. And out of this 5, first four are accompanied by Upekka, equanimity, whereas Kaya Vijnana is accompanied by Dukkha. And then there are two more. One is Sampatichana, the other is Santirana. Normally, you can find these two chittas in the cognitive process, right? One is called investigating consciousness, and the other is called receiving consciousness. So this is receiving consciousness, Sampatichana, and Santirana is investigating consciousness. That means when your senses are active and with the association between sense organs and sense objects, when there is a particular type of consciousness arises, it takes few moments, probably you can say sub moments to determine. So these two consciousness function there as receiving consciousness and investigating consciousness to determine what type of consciousness it is. So what it means is also that in the cognitive process, to have a full cognition, you have 17 mind moments, right? And each moment is differentiated from the other. In a sequence, they occur. But here you would find that you can have consciousness associated with your indriyas, and any particular type of cognition that arises associated with any of the indriyas could be, followed by the subsequent consciousness, probably, to determine and to identify this particular type of consciousness, if it is pleasant, unpleasant. So what it means is that you have this separate consciousness, and also you have following consciousnesses. Right now, this receiving consciousness could be a receiving consciousness after the eye consciousness. It could be after the nose consciousness. Finally, when you came up with a particular idea or ideation that this is this. Let us look at the explanation. Ahetuka chittani. Ahetuka means without roots. And this is very clear because they do not have any particular roots associated with them, and qualifies those types of consciousness that are devoid of the mental factors called hetu, roots. And clearly here the reference point is the 6 roots: lobha, dosa, moha, and alobha, adosa, amoha, which may be either wholesome or indeterminate. This is wholesome roots, and this is unwholesome, 3 unwholesome. Since a root is a factor which helps to establish stability in a chitta, those chittas which lack roots are weaker than those which possess them. You understand this point? Now, chittas with a root is said to be stronger compared to the chittas without roots. That is the idea. And these chittas are called vipaka chitta, right? They are, how do you say? Resultant consciousness. Now, if you look at Professor Karunadasa's text, for example, he says And it is quite logical that the difference between wholesome and unwholesome chittas and resultant chittas is not just, because some of the chittas having roots, sahetuka, and some of the chittas are ahetuka. They have significance in that, the ahetuka chittas are just the resultant one. They do not produce any kind of effect. They themselves are vipaka. Because otherwise, the problem that Professor Karunadasa points out is that there will be no end of karma. So it could be akusala vipaka or kusala vipaka, but that is because they are result of the akusala chittas, result of the kusala chittas. Therefore, they are called kusala and akusala vipaka chitta. But they themselves are not to be identified as kusala and akusala chittas. Otherwise, it would lead to karmic determinism. That is the expression that is used by this professor. Which book do you have? Here, you read this section. The term resultant describes the types of consciousness that arise as results of karma. They are the results of volitional activity, both wholesome and unwholesome. So results of the wholesome and unwholesome actions that were performed previously, right? However, they in turn are not karmically differentiated as wholesome and unwholesome. So even though they are called akusala vipaka chitta or kusala vipaka chitta, they themselves do not represent kusala and akusala chittas. If they can be so differentiated, then this will mean that results of karma too are karma. So then there will not be any difference between Kama and Vipaka. The characteristics or the differences between Kama and Vipaka is that the Kama chittas are having roots, whereas the Vipaka chittas are ahetuka, even though they are identified as kusala and akusala chittas. This will result in a situation where one karma gives rise to another karma, and the later in turn to yet another, and thus to an interminable process of karmic determinism. Now, I think this confusion is present in many people, right? This karmic determinism, because I see that many people raise this question that, if our intention is karma, and if the cognitive process is going on forever, and in the cognitive process, each mind moment is functioning as a cause for the next moment, right? Then can there be any way out of it? Is it not all determined and fixed? Right? But here you can see that out of 89 types of chittas, there are some chittas that are called sahetuka chitta, and there are some called that are ahetuka chitta. Similarly, from one vipaka does not proceed another vipaka. For if this hypothesis were true, then deliverance from all suffering would not be possible. Yeah. So what is your opinion on this? Now, you have just this 89 chittas, but it says that in a blink of an eye, millions of chittas pass, right? So what it means is that you can have countless loba chittas in a series, countless dosa chittas. You can have countless akusala vipaka chittas or kusala vipaka chittas. It is not, one chitta is becoming one chitta with root becoming a cause for the arising of, another, how do you say, ahetuka chitta corresponding to that as Kama and Vipaka. Millions of chittas of same nature, right? But when you talk about two chittas in a sequence, there is a causal connection. The previous one is becoming the cause for the succeeding one. And that one again is becoming the cause for the following one. But nothing is transmitted. Transmission of nothing happens there. Nothing to be transmitted. It is like the example, if you remember, the example of this violin producing sound. Okay.
What will be the differences between cost becoming effect, and effect and cost again?
Yes.
So in that case, like the previous Akusla, and then it rise to this mind, resulting mind of Akusla. So this resulting mind of Akusla cannot become like, cannot serve as a cause.
There is a causal connection between, every two chittas, right? So that is how it continues. But now this is, of course, when you talk about the nature of chittas, when you study conditional relations, you come to know that there are so many different forces influencing this process. So it is not that when you have this akusala chitta, because you have this one moment of akusala chitta, and then it will function as a cause for the arising of next chitta and the next one and the next one, and it is going to be all unwholesome only. It is not like that.
Yeah, I mean, it could be also so the resultant consciousness towards another moment of possible arising.
Another resultant consciousness. No, yeah, that could be possible.
Nevertheless, as I said, this resulting mind consciousness cannot produce another.
Cannot give rise to another, how do you say? In a series of thoughts, I think there could be many resultant consciousness of similar nature. But they are not giving rise to any new type of other consciousness. They do not have that capability.
Is it because they are too weak? Or?
Yes, yes. They are weak. As it is mentioned here, they are weak because they do not have the roots. But of course, they are associated with other mental factors. Every chitta is associated with other mental factors, chatasikas. Right? So there could be, in the vipaka, probably because it is resultant consciousness. Now you are just, there is just the experience of the Kama that was performed. Once it is done, it is done. So that is why I'm saying that there could be other influences because, for example, if we take the example of this akusala chitta continuing in a series of, thought, there could be other influence. For example, if you suddenly, come to know about a certain teaching, somebody tells you of a certain teaching, that is an influence that is breaking your thought process, that is creating a new one, that is functioning as a condition as well. Right?
Because I was thinking about the animals, so they are they receive as the result of like moha.
Mm.
So things should come the animal, so that mind of moha always been wholesome.
Yes, we have studied earlier that when you talk about different avachara, kama avachara, rupa avachara, rupa avachara, now in a particular avachara, there can be present of other types of consciousness, right? But why it is termed or why it is recognized as belonging to that particular sphere is because there is a particular type of consciousness that is strong and that is associated to that realm of existence, and how do you say, that is typical of that realm of existence. So it means that should be prevalent, that should be present most of the time. Now, as a human being, for example, you have this human being consciousness, not animal consciousness, right? But sometimes people become animal, right? So, but as a human being, because this is the predominant type of consciousness that is present there, that defines your nature. So even in the realm of animals, as you are saying, if they are in the state of moha, if moha is the dominating factor, that should be present throughout. But it does not mean that other types of consciousness will not arise.
That implies that everyone pushes the same.
I'm not sure. If you look at the Jataka stories, sometimes some of the animals did, outstanding works to help other beings, other people. Even human beings cannot do that. So, yes. Yeah. So, 18 chittas in this category in 3 groups: unwholesome resultant, and functional. Unwholesome resultant consciousness. Why they are called unwholesome resultant consciousness? The first category of rootless consciousness comprises the 7 types of consciousness that result from unwholesome karma. These types of consciousness are not themselves unwholesome, but karmically indeterminate. The word unwholesome here means that they are resultants produced by unwholesome karma. The word qualifies not these states of consciousness themselves, but the karma from which they are born. So this is very clear in this explanation. Now look at the types of consciousness in this category. For example, I consciousness, and similarly all the other consciousness associated with different indriyas. The first 5 types of resultant consciousness in both classes, the whole unwholesome resultants and the wholesome resultants, are those that are based on the sensitive matter of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. So this is in terms of origination of consciousness, right? So they are also called, for example, Panchadwara Avajjana, consciousness associated to 5 doors, 5 sense doors. These 10 chittas are collectively designated the 2 sets of 5-fold sense consciousness, Dvi Panchaviyana. Now here the discussion is focused on 2 types, both types, wholesome and unwholesome resultant consciousness associated with 5 indriyas, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. Eye consciousness arises based upon eye sensitivity, Chakupasada. Its function is simply to see, to cognize directly and immediately the visible object. The other types of sense consciousness also arise based upon their respective sensitivity, and their function is simply to cognize their respective objects, to hear sounds, to smell smells, to taste tastes, and to feel tangibles. In the case of unwholesome resultants, the object is unpleasant or undesirable. However, the impact of the object on the first 4 sense faculties is weak, and thus the associated feeling is neutral, upekka sahagata. That is, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, and tongue consciousness, they are relatively weak, and therefore they are associated with neutral feeling. But in the case of unwholesome resultant body consciousness, the object's impact on the body faculty is strong, and thus the accompanying feeling is bodily pain. So therefore it is called dukkha sahagata. There could be a question here actually. I think I'm not sure how it should be understood, because now we are talking about resultant, akusala resultant consciousness. These are resultant consciousness. They are not supposed to produce any karma. But when you talk about accompanied by painful bodily feeling, could this be a cause to give rise to another chitta? I'm not sure. We need to look at the exposition and see. Yeah. Cause is the unwholesome Kama, and Vipaka is also unwholesome resultant, but accompanied by painful bodily feeling. Is it accompanied by painful bodily feeling? I'm not sure. Yeah, but if somebody is born with defect, that is because of probably previous karma, or I don't know, for some other reason. But when somebody is still living, it doesn't mean that when somebody is have defective parts of body, he's having constant painful feeling. I don't think so. Now this later 2 types of consciousness, one is Sampadichana Chitta and the other is Santirana Chitta. When a sense object impinges on a sense faculty at one of the 5 sense doors, for example, a visible form on the eye, first there arises a chitta adverting to the object. Immediately after this, eye consciousness arises seeing that form. This act of seeing lasts only for a single mind moment. Immediately thereafter arises a chitta, which apprehends or receives the object that had been seen by eye consciousness. This is the receiving consciousness, which results from the same type of karma that produced the eye consciousness. Yeah. So this is what I was talking about earlier, that it is a subsequent consciousness, right? So you have consciousness associated with a different sense organ, right? Here the example is given of eye consciousness, and immediately after the eye consciousness arises, it is followed by sampadichana chitta, that is receiving consciousness. The function of receiving consciousness is to apprehend what has been seen by the eyes. So basically it says that, for example, of course it is in, I mean, when you try to understand it in detail, that if you are talking about an eye consciousness, as soon as there is communication between sense organ and object, you do not have identification of the object yet. It is just your sense faculty of the eye, or you can say that the eye sensitivity giving rise to eye consciousness is awakened, right? So probably you can just see some shape and color. Even prior to that, the identification comes much later. If it is red, blue, long, short, you see. Yes. True. That is true. So under different circumstances, your eye consciousness could be different, right? So, but as long as the consciousness, cognitive moment is concerned, it is there. Now, if you have, eye problems, for example, you see things slightly differently. It does not, I mean, then it is related to if you are having a proper knowledge of the object, that is a different matter. But as long as the cognition process is concerned, you have that cognitive moment. Now, it could be that if you are colorblind, right, you see things differently, right, compared to other people around you. But still, you have your cognitive moment arising in your chitta process, in your stream of consciousness. But if you are talking about getting the right information, right data or not, that is a different matter of discussion, different topic of discussion. What you are seeing, are you getting the right information of the object or not? The following one is called Santirana Chitta. This is another rootless resultant consciousness which arises immediately after the receiving consciousness. So this is followed by the previous one. Its function is to investigate or examine the object that had just been cognized by the sense consciousness and apprehended by the receiving consciousness. The receiving consciousness and the investigating consciousness arise only in the five sense doors, and both are results of past karma. Yes, so these are the seven akusala vipaka chitta. Now, similarly, you have kusala vipaka chitta ahetuka without root, and here you see that just as five, akusala vipaka chitta associated with five indriyas, you have five kusala vipaka chitta connected to five sense indriyas as well. Let's read it together. Upekka sahagatam chakku viyanam tata sota viyanam ghana viyanam jibha viyanam sukha sahagatam kaya viyanam upekka sahagatam sampatijjana chittam somanassa sahagatam santirana chittam upekka sahagatam santirana chittam chati imani attapi kusala vipaka hetu ahetuka chittani nama. So in this category you have 8. Here you have 2 investigating consciousness. So 2 moments of consciousness, that is 14 and 15 are investigating consciousness. One is associated with somanassa, pleasant mind. The other is upekka, equanimity. So you have eye consciousness accompanied by equanimity, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness associated by equanimity. But you have body consciousness accompanied by pleasure. Right? So just as in the akusala vipaka chitta, they have body consciousness accompanied by painful feeling. And then you have receiving consciousness, just as the previous section, and 2 moments of investigating consciousness. The 8 types of consciousness in this category are a result of wholesome karma. This is very clear. In the designation of the previous class, the word ahetuka was not included because all unwholesome resultants are rootless. There are no unwholesome resultants that are accompanied by roots. However, as will be seen later, wholesome resultants can be accompanied by roots, namely by beautiful roots that are karmically indeterminate, abhyakata. To distinguish the wholesome resultants that are rootless from those with roots, the word ahetuka is included in their class designation. So what it says here is that in the case of akusala vipaka chitta, all of them are ahetuka. Whereas in the case of kusala chitta, there are some ahetuka and there are some with roots. So we'll come to know about that later. Now, 7 of these types of consciousness correspond to the unwholesome resultants, right? So there is just one more that is added here. But whereas the unwholesome resultants arise in regard to an undesirable object, the wholesome resultants arise in regard to an object that is desirable or extremely desirable. So 2 points are mentioned here: desirable, itta, and extremely desirable, ati itta. The first 4 sense consciousness here, like their counterparts, are associated with equanimity, that is neutral feeling, but the impact of the object on the body being strong, the feeling associated with wholesome resultant body consciousness is that of bodily pleasure. The rootless, wholesome resultants include one type of consciousness without a counterpart among the unwholesome resultants. This is the investigating consciousness accompanied by joy. That is the last one. Sorry, second last, this one. Investigating consciousness accompanied by joy. Whereas the investigating consciousness resulting from unwholesome karma is always accompanied by neutral feeling, that resulting from wholesome karma is twofold. One accompanied by neutral feeling, arisen in regard to a moderately desirable object, and one accompanied by joy, which arises when the object is especially desirable. Thus, there are 8 types of consciousness in this class, in contrast to the 7 types found in the former class. So these 2 investigating consciousness especially are associated with if the object of consciousness is desirable or extremely desirable. Looks like these 2 investigating consciousness are associated with greed chittas. When you talk about desire, right? And the Abhidhammikas present, these 2 types of chittas in terms of, different degrees of desire. But you have a clear idea about receiving consciousness and investigating consciousness, right? These 2 types of consciousness are followed by the sense consciousness. So you have sense consciousness, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so on. As soon as the sense consciousness arises, the following consciousness is receiving consciousness, and after that is investigating consciousness. In the case of kusala, ahetuka, vipaka, chitta, you have 2 investigating consciousness. One is associated with joy, the other is associated with equanimity, and these 2 investigating consciousness arise depending on the desire that one has with regard to a particular object. If the desire is moderate, then it is accompanied by joy. If it is especially desirable, if it is moderate, you have neutral feeling. If it is especially desirable, you have joy. So this is in chart. So far, how many types of chittas you have come to know? And then twelve akusala chittas plus now 15. 7 akusala vipaka chitta and 8 kusala Vipaka, Chitta. Now let's look at the other three types of Chittas. That are called just Ahetuka Kriya Chittani. Rootless functional consciousness. Let's read it together. Upekka Sahagatam Panchadwara Vajjana Chittam Tata Manodwara Vajjana Chittam Somanasa Sahagatam Hasitupada Chittam Chati Imani Tenipi Ahetuka Kriya Chittani Nama. Echevam Sabatapi Attarasa Ahetuka Chittani Samatani. So altogether 18 types. Now here the first one says 5 sense door adverting consciousness accompanied by equanimity. As is mind door adverting consciousness. Smile producing consciousness accompanied by joy. So these are Kriya Chitta. So there is a difference between Vipaka Chitta and Kriya Chitta. Right? We have discussed it earlier. Vipaka, as the term refers to, means resultant consciousness, a result of the Kama Chittas. Kriya Chittas are called functional consciousness. Probably, they refer to I think it could be that, for example, when you talk about Vipaka Chitta, right? And countless Vipaka Chittas arising, and there could be some functional Chittas, functional Chitta moments. Now, when you talk about result, and it means that they are the result of previously done actions. So they are connected to the action consciousness, right?
But this Kriya Chitta, they are said to be resulting.
Yeah, so they are at the time of, that is why I'm saying that in a series of consciousness, probably, when you talk about resultant consciousness, there could be some that are not really resultant, but they're just functional consciousness. That means they are just arising. Now, actually, the consciousness of the enlightened beings are, in some cases, they are functional consciousness. There can be some, how do you say, sobana, beautiful consciousness, right? But most of the time could be functional consciousness because they are not producing any karma. So they are not supposed to have resultant consciousness, right? But then how their mind is functioning, how their mind is working. So they have functional consciousness. Now here, number 16 is called 5 sense door adverting consciousness. I think it should be clear because the consciousness that is arising here is through the 5 sense door. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. So any of the sense door. And the other is separated, that is, mind door adverting consciousness, right? Because in the case of mind, your physical senses are not working. So it is just the thoughts in your mind. And here is a very interesting one. This is called smile producing consciousness accompanied by joy. This is just, when you are happy, you are smiling. But this is particularly explained to be the consciousness of enlightened beings, not your smile and my smile. Because this is ahetuka kiriya chitta, rootless functional consciousness. Why they are called rootless functional consciousness? They are not result of kamic consciousness. They belong to the category called kiriya, rendered here as functional, to indicate that they perform tasks which do not have any karmic potency. Such types of consciousness are neither causal karma nor the result of karma. Within this category, three types of consciousness are rootless. The rest described later are with roots. Panchadwara Vajjana Chitta, when an external sense object impinges on one of the five physical sense organs, before the appropriate sense consciousness can arise, for example, eye consciousness seeing a form, another consciousness must have arisen first. This consciousness is the five sense door adverting consciousness, which has the function of adverting to whatever object is presenting itself at one of the five sense doors. So it is just the moment of, how do you say, being awake. Your senses are awake. The example for, given, for example, is the, when you are, I think you are familiar with this example that when somebody is taking a rest in a mango garden, his bhavanga chitta is continuing. He doesn't know anything. He's in, deep sleep, in good rest. And then suddenly a mango falls from a tree. And then his senses, get vibrated, right? And then slowly he wakes up and he sees the object and come to know that this is a ripe mango, right? So before recognizing it, before giving rise to his eye consciousness, there is just the moment of being awake. His senses are awake. That is what it means here. Prior to giving rise to consciousness, this consciousness, the five sense door adverting consciousness, which has the function of adverting avajjana to whatever object is presenting itself at one of the five sense doors. So just before your particular sense is, receiving, or how do you say, generating consciousness associated with the object, the prior situation, preceding situation of that series. This consciousness does not see, hear, smell, taste, or touch the object. You see, this makes it very clear. Still, it doesn't see it. You do not have eye consciousness yet. It simply turns to the object, thereby enabling the sense consciousness to arise in immediate succession. Immediate succession.
Then people in deep sleep, the ears is functions, that's why we heard the voice.
Yeah, right.
The eyes is function. It starts from the ear, that one is under the awareness. That means mention there is the process of conventions as long as your eyes will open itself.
Eye consciousness is also functioning, associated with the sound. You hear the sound.
But the awareness is with the sound.
With the sound, you do not know if it is a mango or something else. But I think logically, because you are in a mango group, so it should be mango. There could be something else. So with the eye only, he gets confirmed.
But before you get confirmed that one is not count as the process of consciousness, you count as like aware.
So you have two types of consciousness. One is ear consciousness.
If
The
the
other is
ear is not conscious,
yeah. Then
you don't have the awareness.
yeah, right, true. if he's what is the word, deaf, yeah, then he doesn't have that consciousness. He doesn't have this eye consciousness also because he doesn't know.
So the awareness also must be certain consciousness before he can aware it.
What?
The type of function of awareness must accompany with certain kind of consciousness. Then you have the action of aware.
This is connected to how do you say, if somebody is with defective sense organ, right? Now the example is given of a person whose senses are all intake, functioning properly. What about mind door adverting consciousness? This type of consciousness can arise either in a cognitive process occurring at the five sense doors or in a process occurring at the mind door. In each case, it performs a different function. When it occurs in a five-door process, it is called the Votapana Chitta, determining consciousness. Its function then is to determine or define the object that has been cognized by sense consciousness. In the five-door process, determining consciousness succeeds the investigating consciousness. After the investigating consciousness has examined the object, the determining consciousness determines it. So mind door consciousness can function two ways. One is with regard to the sense door consciousness, right? The other is with regard to the object of the mind. In a mind door process, a cognitive process that occurs through the internal ideation faculty, the same type of consciousness performs another function. Its function then is to advert to the object appearing at the mind door. In such a role, this chitta is known as the mind door adverting consciousness. Yes, so in the mind door consciousness, you will need to have several moments of this awareness to, be fully aware of a particular idea, right? Particular thoughts. That is what it means here, because in the case of sense door consciousness, being awake and then, coming in contact with the object and then giving rise to the consciousness, it is very clear. The process is clear. What about the case of mind door consciousness? Because it is not associated with sense doors, right? So it is your thoughts. So it could be that immediately you are aware of your thoughts. But what it says here is that it takes several moments, right? That is what it means. That in the prior moment you are just, directing your mind probably, and then gradually you are becoming familiar, or you are knowing the thoughts in your mind. So before giving rise to mind consciousness, you have this, how do you say? Yeah. Manodara Vajjana Chitta. adverting consciousness. By the term, I think it should be clear actually. So it is like it's like when you go to open the door, because the word door is used, dwara. You go near to the door and opening the door, right? So eye consciousness, when you talk about the generation of eye consciousness, prior to giving rise to the eye consciousness, you have this panchadwara avajjana, adverting consciousness. That is like just the prior moment of that eye consciousness or ear consciousness. Now it is not like, how do you say? You are giving rise to an eye consciousness and your another indriya, consciousness is becoming active. So it is just associated with a particular indriya. So it could be like few moments, but connected to this particular indriya. It could be eye consciousness, eye indriya, or ear, nose, tongue, body, and even mind.
So it performs as the determined. So it represents mind become the mind chitta. Because now we have a series of chitta, adverting, and then receiving, and then investigation, and then we come to the determined chitta. But here it's like it forms as the mind chitta, like it precedes the other moments.
Did you look at that 17 moments in the Bhavanga Chitta?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the
It is on what page? 183. That is in which chapter?
Number 76. The 71 numbers, number 76.
I am looking for the chart. This one. So yeah, this is the one that is referred to here. 5-door adverting. You see, this is prior to sense consciousness, and then you have receiving and investigating consciousness. After that, determining. What is your question?
It forms as the Chalayan Chitta in the first instance. But so then it comes like after the previous process, like adverting, receiving, and the other moments of chitta. we like concept of Chitta, it forms as the communal object of the object. But when it comes to the Manamana Chitta, it forms two tasks. And one is the Vasavana Chitta, which is a Manamana Chitta in the past history.
So it says here, in the 5-door process, determining consciousness succeeds the investigating consciousness. After the investigating consciousness has examined the object, the determining consciousness determines it. It also says, in each case, it performs a different function. So that means, yes, this Manodwara Avajana Chitta, mind door adverting consciousness, can function differently. When it is associated with the 5 sense door consciousness, it can have different function. When it is associated with mind door consciousness, it can have different function. Okay, I think we are supposed to have a break now. After the break, we will come to this again. Okay, let us resume the class now. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Can be either Shamani Chitta or Vedan Chitta. So in the case when in the left through the Shamani Chitta, from the Pancha Chitta is going to also have Shamani Chitta. And for the Chitta also we have this Chitta as well. So what will be the difference?
Yeah. So look at this chart here of the cognitive process. The difference is that when you are talking about Pancha Dwara Vajjana Chitta and Manodwara Vajjana Chitta, so it seems like there are 2 different functions. One is that in the case of Panchadwara Avajjana Chitta, here, right? So before a particular consciousness associated with an Indriya becomes active, it is just the prior moment of that. In the case of Panchadwara Avajjana Chitta, right? This is clear. Now, when it becomes determining Chitta, that is what is the confusion, right? After receiving and investigating, now you see here, prior to a particular Indriya becoming active, there is, it seems like there is a mind moment there, right? Just immediately preceding moment, right? Now, once you have particular, consciousness associated with any of the 5 doors, after receiving and investigating, it becomes a mental process again. You see? So then it functions as a determining consciousness. You see? So so you have this, how do you say, 3 sub moments or 3 moments. Prior to I consciousness, etc., it functions as a Panchadwara Avajjana. And when you talk about Manodwara Vajjana, when it becomes part of this mental process, it becomes a dharma, probably a thought. So then you have the functioning from here as Manodwara Vajjana, right? Because this I consciousness, after receiving and investigating, it needs some time to determine. So this is the aspect that is that should be understood here, and then it takes several moments to determine exactly. Then you register what it is. So that is what I said here. This is 155. This type of consciousness can arise either in a cognitive process occurring at the five sense doors or in a process occurring at the mind door. Keep this in mind, five sense door and mind door. In each case, it performs a different function. When it occurs in a five door process, it is called the Vottapana Chitta, determining consciousness. Its function then is to determine or define the object that has been cognized by sense consciousness. In the five-door process, determining consciousness succeeds the investigating consciousness. After the investigating consciousness has examined the object, the determining consciousness determines it. In a mind door process, a cognitive process that occurs through the internal ideation faculty, the same type of consciousness performs another function. Its function then is to advert to the object appearing at the mind door. In such a role, this chitta is known as the mind door adverting consciousness. Look at the explanation provided here. The second is called mind door adverting consciousness, Manodwara Vajjana Chitta. Its function is to advert to an object which appears at the mind door and which thus sets in motion a process of mental events leading to the cognition of a mental object. This same consciousness performs another function when it appears in a cognitive process based on any of the five physical sense organs. Here its function is to determine the object that has been apprehended by sense consciousness. When it performs this role, it is called Vottapana Chitta, the consciousness that determines the object of cognition. So one is, so I think Manodwara Avajjana Chitta, as the explanation tells us, is the prior condition of the Panchadwara Avajjana, and also it functions the aspect of Vottapana Chitta. After a particular sense indriya consciousness has taken place, after receiving and investigating. Where is it? You can look at the chart again of the cognitive process. One is prior to eye consciousness, etc. When it is adverting consciousness, that is probably the aspect of Manodhara Avajjana. That is what it tells us here. And as a determining consciousness, Vattapana, that is the second function. So two functions it plays. This is the function of Manodhara Avajjana Chitta. The third one is this one, right? Hasitupada Chitta, smile producing consciousness. This is a chitta peculiar to Arahants, including Buddhas and Pacceka Buddhas, who are also types of Arahants. Its function is to cause Arahants to smile about sense sphere phenomena. According to the Abhidhamma, Arahants may smile with one of the five chittas, the four beautiful sense sphere functional chittas, that is in a different section, and the rootless smile producing consciousness mentioned here. So the other four we will come to know later. So this is one of the five, and this is as it says, peculiar to Arahants and also Buddhas and Pacceka Buddhas. Otherwise, if common whirling smile, it could be either with some kind of roots or probably functional, I'm not sure, but as a Kiriya, probably resultant, but as a Kiriya Chitta, this is unique to the enlightened beings. There are some, how do you say, accounts of Buddha smiling, right? If you read in some places.
And so I think when they were from across the road, and just saw a big man to smile, and I asked him what was the matter. He said, this big in the previous life, he was a farmer.
I see.
It's like he
I see. So there are some incidents. Yes, and it says that normally the Buddha smile, I think with mouth keeping closed, because sometimes it says that when he smile also, if teeth are shining. So, and I do not remember exactly where it is mentioned, but there is an incident that is mentioned in some places in the text, that Buddha is accompanied by some monks, including Ananda, and then suddenly Ananda realized that there is a kind of a, how do you say, lightning, and then he was trying to figure out what is the cause for this lightning. Probably it was in the daytime, and then he approached the Buddha and asked, and he came to know that the Buddha smiled. So he was asking the reason behind Buddha's smiling. Sorry? What? That is also true. Without reason, why should somebody smile? But now these enlightened beings, obviously they are in a blissful state normally, right? So this blissful state could be probably, if you just try to think about it, it could be, most of the time I think it could be a state of upekka, equanimity, right? So when you are even, I mean, when you are talking about upekha, in the case of upekha sahagata, this, chitta rooted in moha also, right? Deluded chitta. You are not in a position to judge if it is pleasant, unpleasant, and so on. Therefore, it is not accompanied by, at that moment at least, pleasantness, unpleasantness, happiness or sadness, right? Because you are not in a position to decide. But in the case of enlightened beings, because they are fully aware, fully awake, they are beyond all these ideations of, kusala, akusala, and so on. Firstly, they are in a blissful state. Secondly, they are in a state of equanimity. So without reason, they are not supposed to laugh or smile, right? So when the Buddha, for example, feels something, he smiles, and then when somebody asks him, he provides the explanation, right?
So it is like if one became Arahant, one day realize that he became Chitta and state. So sometimes in this mind, we might feel happy.
But it doesn't mean that you should smile if somebody just feel happy. But there are cases, I think probably one would smile as well, because when one is overcome by excessive joy, right? Loving kindness. Now you have this Brahma Vihara meditation on metta, meditation on karuna, right? Meditation on mudita and upekha. Upekha is the highest one. You become equanimous. But what when you develop loving kindness to all different directions? That is the instruction, right? You are joyful. So you do not need any common, ordinary reason to smile or be happy. You are happy inside because you do not have any reason to be sad. You are filled with loving kindness.
It means they don't expose the things in their mind there.
There could be different ways of expression. You'll see in Theravada and Theravada, when there is shift in one's understanding about the reality of existence, right? All these theras and theories, they come up with a certain type of expression. Sometimes they sing song. Those verses, automatically they just, come up with some verses. It is their automatic expression. Some would even, utter some verses or words that regard in some way, how do you say, their previous states of being, that, this is what they have been going through and now they are free. So it is a kind of a recognition, and also I think a kind of, even you can say that, of course, happy feeling, but with a kind of a remorse as well, that, regretting. Like when the Buddha became enlightened, he said that I have been wandering in this samsara for a long period of time, and now I do not have to do that because I have found the builder of the house, right? I have caught him. So now I'm not going to let him build new house for me. So when you think of, when you are suddenly awakened, all these lifetimes you have been wandering in the samsara, and this was all painful. And this is a kind of a release, right? And when you think of, how stupid or fool you have been without knowing, so you a kind of regret, and then you become happy that now it's okay, now it is all settled. This is really interesting because it is like, I feel that it is like, several layers of dreams or stories, story under story, right? Or dreams in dreams. So in what layer of dream you are in, we are not sure. That is the problem. And this dream world become reality for us. Therefore, when somebody from outside talk about enlightenment, awakening, freedom from great hatred and delusion, nirvana, all these things appear to be impossible or something, some fantasy, some kind of fantasy. So it is a matter of being stuck in the dream and also being overcome by ignorance, not knowing that one is in the dream. And this existence, which is filled with suffering and confusion, becomes part of your living. Therefore, you are not in a position to clearly understand that you are suffering also. What you and I understand as suffering is not exactly suffering. Normally, what we refer to suffering, for example, you would find some fundamental statements that birth is suffering. And how do you regard it as suffering now, for example? When somebody is born in a family, everybody celebrates, right? Only death is considered as suffering. But in the process, death is just the, moment giving rise to new life. If you talk about, beginningless samsara, wandering in samsara. And in that sense, there is no difference between birth and death. Because birth is also categorized as suffering, death is also categorized as suffering. What exactly is suffering? You and I are not suffering now, right? Not because of weather, not because of sickness. But then what exactly is suffering? So it is the very fact of not knowing, the ignorance, that is represented as suffering. Not knowing, the ignorance. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of not knowing that we are in suffering. It is like sankhara, of course, it is the entirety of sankhara, formations. Sometimes, I think probably you will be familiar because we use normally this word in our language, and I'm not sure about in other language. This is his sankhara, people say, right? You see how he is behaving, this is his sankhara. So sankhara is then related to, it is used to refer to a kind of a very heavy tendency, strong tendency, habit, so strong that not easy to change, not easy to difficult. This is a sankhara. People say that. Nature, this is the nature of his being, his existence, his behavior, his characteristics and everything. Now, when you are in that, if you do not come out of it, how do you know that, that is suffering or that is unpleasant, that is unwanted? So all these teachings, all these teachers, the purpose is to generate that thought within us, to show us that there is a way out. Just how do you say, give it a try. So if you become convinced by the teachings or by all these messages, then a different type of chitta will arise in your mind, and then you will make an effort. These are considered as fundamentals of suffering, right? Birth, aging, sickness, death. In short, attachment to 5 aggregates. That is what it is, attachment to 5 aggregates. But what do you think is the worst thing that can happen in people's life? Apart from this, aging, sickness, death. Can you think of something terrible, that can happen to beings? Birth is also included in suffering, right? So this attachment to 5 aggregates, this is the worst thing. Attachment, that is what we have, not the other things. Then, in a way, logically, you can say that what if you are without attachment? Can there be, 5 aggregates without attachment? Or 6 aggregates, 2 aggregates, I don't know how many aggregates, but without attachment, right? So that is the, how do you say, that is the point that all these enlightened beings are trying to convey, that we are living with attachment, and what if you can be free from the attachment? And that's what happens. Because we do not know, because we are in this darkness, in this dream world, so we do not know the bliss or happiness of that. That is the thing. So that is why you need to just, sometimes you need to just believe, or you need to carry out your practice, try and see. That's all. Maybe when you are successful, you will come up with all these statements that how fool I have been, in all these years. So these are natural utterances. So I'd say that apart from reading this Abhidhamma, whenever you have time, try to read this text, Udana Theravada Abhidhamma. You would find some kind of, how do you say, feelings in your heart when reading these books. You will see that these are real people in the time of the Buddha, or even after the Buddha, who have been carried out their practice. They are people like us, right? Males and females, because there are theras and theories. And sometimes in some books, you would find their life stories, what kind of life they have been leading as a family person, as a practitioner. Some were from the wealthy family, some were very poor, having so much of struggle, right? And then they became successful in their practice. And once they became successful, what was their expressions? Yeah, so we are talking about this Hasitupada Chitta. So sometimes probably when you become enlightened, you just be happy and smile. The happiest monk so far I saw is Ajahn Brahmans, because he's smiling and laughing all the time. Okay, so with this we end our discussion on this category of Chitta, Ahetuka Vipaka Chitta. So this is the summary of this section of this Ahetuka Chitta. Satta akusala pakani, punya pakani attada, kiriya chittani tiniti attarasa ahetuka. 7 akusala vipaka chitta and 8 kusala, right? And 3 kiriya chitta, altogether 18 in this category. It seems like these chittas in these two category, how many number? 12 akusala chittas and 18 this vipaka chittas, altogether how many? Okay. Yeah, so only these are the chittas that are associated with this akusala and so on. In fact, in the vipaka chitta, you have some kusala and some kriya as well, right? The rest of the chittas, starting from beautiful chittas here, sobana chittas, the rest of the chittas are all good. So, in terms of number, 12 here, yes, 18 here, and out of 18, 7 unwholesome. 11, these are wholesome and rootless. So including these also, the rest of the chittas are all beautiful chittas out of 89 chittas. So you have very limited number of unwholesome chittas actually. But as Professor Karunadasa points out, it is not the number that matters. It is the frequency of their occurrence. Okay, so that is his observation. He says that one can be happy with the number, that you have more beautiful chittas than unwholesome and unpleasant chittas in the analysis. But now it depends on how much of the good chittas you can generate, or how much bad chittas are generated in a thought process. So that is the real challenge. Okay, now let's look at this beautiful consciousness, Sobana Chitta. Let's read it together. Papa hetu kamuttani sobanani tivuchare ekona satti chittani ateka nubhuti piva. Excluding those that are evil and the rootless, the rest are called beautiful. They number either 59 or 91. So if you count 89 chittas, 59 fall in this category of beautiful consciousness. If you can count 121, 91 chittas fall in this category. Why they are called beautiful chitta? Beautiful consciousness includes all chittas, excluding those that are evil. That is the 12 types of unwholesome consciousness, and the rootless, the 18 types that are utterly devoid of roots. This type of consciousness is called beautiful because it is accompanied by beautiful mental factors. So Chaitasikas are beautiful. Okay, it should be understood that the beautiful has a wider range than the wholesome. So when it is talking about beautiful, and this is of course clear because in the beautiful chittas you have Vipaka chitta and Kriya chitta as well. The beautiful includes all wholesome chittas, but it also includes resultant and functional chittas that possess beautiful mental factors. These later chittas are not wholesome but karmically indeterminate, abhyakata. The beautiful comprises the 24 sense sphere chittas to be defined just below, as well as all fine material sphere chittas, immaterial sphere chittas, and supramundane chittas. Chittas belonging to all these three categories. Sense sphere, Kama, Sobana chitta, and Vipaka and Kriya chitta, and then all fine material chitta, immaterial chitta, and supramundane chittas. Those chittas other than the beautiful are called asobana, non-beautiful. Either 59 or 91, you know of this counting already. The 59 beautiful chittas are obtained thus 24 sense sphere plus 15 fine material and 12 immaterial and 8 supramundane. A total of 91 is obtained by dividing the supramundane chittas into 40 types rather than 8. So look at this chart again. So you have 24 here, right? 8, 8, 8, and then 15 rupa chittas and 12 arupa vachara chittas and 8 supramundane chittas. But when you count 8 as 40, then you have 91 altogether. So these are the 24 Kama vachara Sovana chitta. Out of 24, 8 are kusala, 8 are resultant, and 8 are vipaka, and 8 are resultant, kriya. Let's read this 8 together first. Somanassa sahagatang yana sampayuttam asankarikam ekam. Somanassa sahagatam yana sampayuttam sasankarikam ekam. Somanassa sahagatam yana vipayuttam asamkarikam ekam. Somanassa sahagatam yana vipayuttam sasankarikam ekam. Upekka sahagatam yana sampayuttam asankarikam ekam. Upekka sahagatam yana sampayuttam sasankarikam ekam. Upekka sahagatam yana vipayuttam asankarikam ekam. Upekka sahagatam yana vipayuttam sasankarikam ekanti. Imani attapi sahetuka kama vachara kusala chittani nama. So first of all, what we need to note is that they are sahetuka, with root, belong to kama vachara, and they are classified as kusala chitta. Right? Two aspects representing this kusala chitta: somanassa, pleasant. There are 4, and upekka. There is no domanassa here. And out of these 8, 4 are yana sampayutta and 4 yana vipayutta. 4 asankarika and 4 sasankarika.
To this realm, there is no dogma because it's spontaneous.
Yes, no domanassa. So why they are called kama vachara kusala chitta? This class of consciousness is divided into 8 types on the basis of 3 principles of dichotomization. Yes, so this is what we have just mentioned in terms of concomitant feeling. Somanassa and upekka, knowledge, presence and absence of knowledge, yana sampayutta, yana vipayutta, and then sasankarika and asankarika. So what does it mean by yana sampayutta? Knowledge comprehends things as they are. Yata bhavam, yata sabhavam. So this is a different expression used here. Rather than, what is the expression, popular expression? Yata bhutam. Yeah. So here it is. Yata sabhavam. In the consciousness associated with knowledge, the word yana refers to the mental factor of wisdom, panya chetasika, which also represents the root non-delusion, amoha. Consciousness dissociated from knowledge lacks this factor of wisdom, but it does not involve ignorance or delusion, which pertains only to unwholesome consciousness. So the difference between yana sampayutta and yana vipayutta is that when it says yana sampayutta, it is associated with wisdom as a mental factor. But when it says yana vipayutta, dissociated from knowledge, it does not mean that it is filled with ignorance. Unprompted, according to the commentary, one does a good deed without prompting due to physical or mental fitness, good food and climate, etc., and as a result of having performed similar deeds in the past. Prompting occurs through inducement by another or by personal deliberation, as explained above. This is, I think, a very important point here. Now, why somebody performs a good action? That is the question here. Sometimes spontaneously, sometimes with prompting. What does it mean by performing good deeds spontaneously? So what it says here is that, for example, without prompting here refers to, due to physical and mental fitness, good food and climate, etc., and as a result of having performed similar deeds in the past. So what it means here is that in common terms, for example, you would find that, for example, I have been to Sri Lanka and Thailand. I have seen that in Sri Lanka, for example, in schools, especially in almost every school, before starting the school, they have to participate in, chanting and worshipping the Buddhas and so on. And all of them, they wear white dress, or even Bodhi Puja. This, how do you say it? Bodhi Puja, Bodhi tree. They do a kind of a chanting and prayer around the Bodhi tree. So this training is given to them since childhood. Apart from that, they have this Sunday school. So every Sunday, all the students in a particular village has to go to a temple to receive Dhamma teaching. So they have a syllabus and examination and everything, right? In Thailand, most of the primary school and high school are connected to temples, majority of them. The reason is that since childhood, they would have good education, moral education, from the temple, they would participate in different activities, good activities. So the point is that when since childhood, you give this training to the children to be good, to do good deeds, to help other people, it becomes a habit. Sometimes they do not know why they are doing it, right? But it becomes part of their life that, if somebody is in pain, they should go and help. Not with the thinking that, if I go and help, I will accumulate merit. If I do not do, I will not accumulate merit. If I follow this path, I will accumulate more merit, that path, less merit. without thinking too much about it. They just, I'm not saying that only in these countries people do that. What I'm saying is that in any part of the world, in any family, any culture, if children are given this training without thinking about heavens and hells, merits and demerits, they will just help people. So this is without prompting. Now, why there is a talk of, for example, physical fitness, mental fitness? If you are mentally unhealthy, if you are physically unhealthy, how can you help others? So as much as you want to help other people to have a better situation, you also need to focus on your physicality and mentality to maintain a good health and good mind, right? Because if you are physically and mentally unfit, then you will not like Abhidhamma teaching. Then you will not provide me the summaries, as some of you are doing it. Okay. Yes, and prompted, of course, when you are asked by somebody or you decide. But this is something I think sometimes, when you are carrying out your practice also sometimes, am I preserving this precept or not? Am I breaking it? Did I break it in the morning? So how am I going to do in the afternoon? You are always concerned about these precepts and so on. The reason is that you are not fully into that. I'm not saying that it is bad, but you need to move forward from there, isn't it? With roots, sahetuka, the four wholesome chittas associated with knowledge possess all three wholesome roots. Yeah, the four dissociated from knowledge possess non-greed or generosity, non-hate or loving kindness, but lack non-delusion. So jnana sampayutta and jnana vipayutta, the difference here mentioned is that those that are jnana, this is sahetuka and ahetuka. Yeah, with knowledge, jnana sampayutta and jnana vipayutta, says that those that are associated with knowledge have all three wholesome roots, whereas those that are dissociated from knowledge, they have this two, non-greed and non-hate, but of course, because it is jnana vipayutta, so jnana is not there. The 8 types of wholesome sense-sphere consciousness may be illustrated by the following examples. Someone joyfully performs a generous deed, understanding that this is a wholesome deed spontaneously without prompting. You see, you just do it. You just help people or you just do something good because you know that this is good. That's all. You do not have to think about it, that, I have to decide and then I do it. Or somebody has to, tell you. It is not anything like that. Someone performs the same good deed with understanding after deliberation or prompting by another. Someone joyfully performs a generous deed without prompting, but without understanding that this is a wholesome deed. You do a good work, a good deed, but without knowing that it is a good deed, you just do it. Someone joyfully performs a generous deed without understanding after deliberation or prompting by another. These types of consciousness should be understood in the same way as the preceding 4, but with neutral feeling instead of joyful feeling. So these are the examples of these 8 types of chittas. So they are called wholesome, meritorious, right? So this is clear. They arise in worldlings and trainees, noble disciples at the three lower stages of stream, enter one's returner and non-returner, whenever they perform wholesome bodily deeds and verbal deeds, and whenever they generate wholesome states of mind pertaining to this sense sphere. These chittas do not arise in arahants. Yeah, so this is something that we need to keep in mind, because they belong to kama vachara, kusala chitta. So these three types of sages are included here: sota, panna, sakadagami, anagami, especially as a trainee, right? So when they become arahant, it is not applicable to them. So I think if this is clear, the remaining 16 types would also be clear, because more or less they are the same thing. The only thing is that these are regarded as vipaka now here. You would find that same statement: somanasa sahagatayana sampayita sankarekam ekam sasankarekam ekam, right? Same types of chitta, you can read it by yourself, but they are called vipaka because they are the resultant consciousness, resultant of the previous Kama consciousness. And then Kiriya Chitta is the functional consciousness. So why they are called Kiriya Chittas? Maybe we should read this a bit. Whereas the 8 wholesome sense sphere Chittas arise in worldlings and trainees, they do not arise in Buddhas and Arahants who have transcended the cycle of Kamma and future becoming in the realms of rebirth. However, in Buddhas and Arahants, there arise 8 types of consciousness which are their exact counterparts. You see, these are called Kiriya or functional Chittas because they merely perform their functions without leaving any karmic deposit. Because a Buddha or an Arahant has eradicated all traces of ignorance and craving, the causes of rebirth, there is no way his good actions could generate future results. They merely arise, accomplish some function, and then fall away without residue. So these are the 24 Sobana Chitta. This is the summary here. Vedana Yana Sankara Vedana Chatavisati Sahetu Kamavachara Punya Paka Kriya Mata. The sense sphere consciousness with roots, understood as wholesome, resultant, and functional, becomes 24 by classification according to feeling, knowledge, and prompting. Yeah. So with this, I think we can end our class today here. If you have any question or remark, you can,